The storm hit so suddenly that the white lynx did not even realize the danger until it was too late. A moment ago, she and her mate were navigating the rocky ridge, and in the next second, the frozen ledge gave way under his massive weight. His powerful body tumbled down the jagged slope, a ghostly white shape disappearing into the swirling abyss of the ravine. A sickening crack echoed through the trees, followed by a silence that was even more terrifying than the wind. At the bottom, the male lynx lay trapped between two massive boulders, his breath coming in ragged gasps, while his pregnant mate stood above him, meowing in a desperate, heartbreaking plea, knowing she could not pull him out alone. On a cold, late afternoon, inside a sturdy log cabin tucked deep within the ancient pines, Ranger Liam was kneeling by the wood stove. The air outside was turning bitter, and the first signs of a looming blizzard were whispering against the timber walls. He was carefully arranging heavy oak logs, his movements practiced and slow, while a warm cup of tea sat steaming on the stone hearth. The crackle of the kindling was the only sound in the room until a sudden, heavy and insistent thump on the front door shattered the silence. It wasn't the erratic branch of a windswept tree. It was solid, rhythmic, and deliberate. Liam went instantly still, his breath catching in his throat, every muscle tensed with a primal instinct. In the wilderness, an unannounced knock was rarely a good sign. He rose in a single fluid motion, his hand closing around the cool, heavy iron of the fire poker. He didn't know if he was facing a desperate traveler or something far more dangerous. He moved silently across the creaking wooden floor, his boots making no sound on the rugs. He reached the heavy timber door, which featured a small, circular window set at eye level, a single pane of thick, reinforced glass. Liam wiped away the thick condensation that had formed on the inside of the small peephole, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pressed his eye to the clear glass, and for a moment his blood ran cold. A female white lynx stood on his porch. Her fur was the color of fresh snow, making her look like a phantom against the darkening woods. She was hunched against the biting wind, her thick paws gripping the wooden boards. Even through the glass, Liam could see that her belly was unmistakably pregnant, hanging low and heavy with the weight of new life. She shivered in violent, uncontrollable waves, her breath coming in ragged white plumes. Liam's eyes were drawn to her front leg. A patch of her pristine white fur had been scraped away, revealing raw, red, and dangerously inflamed skin. It wasn't bleeding actively, but the angry color of the wound spoke of intense, throbbing pain. His mind screamed at him, reciting every rule and warning he had ever learned during his years of training. Never trust a cornered predator. A wounded animal is a deadly animal. Don't open the door. But then he looked into her eyes. There was no menace there, no predatory glint or snarl of aggression. Instead, he saw a raw, intelligent desperation, a plea so profound it cut through his fear. He took one deep, steadying breath, gripped the heavy iron bolt, and slid it back. The sound was loud and final in the small cabin. He pulled the door open, and the freezing wind rushed in. The white lynx stumbled back a step, letting out a soft, guttural grunt of pain as she put weight on her injured leg. Despite the warmth radiating from the stove, she made no move to enter. Instead, she did something that defied all animal instinct. She turned her head, her neck straining, and looked with absolute, unwavering focus into the swirling white chaos of the snow-filled forest behind her. Then her head whipped back to him, her pale, amber eyes wide and locking onto his with haunting intensity. She repeated the motion, a sharp, deliberate look into the dark woods, then a desperate, pleading stare back at Liam. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a command. A sentence spoken without a single word. He is out there. I cannot help him. You must come. Liam didn't waste a second trying to rationalize the impossibility of the moment. He slammed the door shut to keep the heat in, dropped the fire poker with a loud clang, and moved with an economy of motion born from years of survival training. He yanked his heavy-duty parka off its hook, shoved his feet into insulated boots, and grabbed his fully stocked emergency med kit and a high-powered flashlight from the shelf. In less than 60 seconds, he was back outside, the door closing with a solid thud behind him as the blizzard began to howl. She was waiting right there. The moment she saw him emerge, she turned and began to move, pushing through the deepening snow. Her limp was a painful, rhythmic stagger, but her resolve was unshakable. Liam followed her white, ghostly shape as it began to dissolve into the heart of the storm. The world quickly turned into a fury of whiteout conditions. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet, and the wind threatened to knock him off his feet. Liam lowered his head, shielding his face, focusing only on the Lynx's struggling form. She was his only compass in a world that had lost its edges. Whenever the distance between them grew too great, she would stop, her sides heaving and her breath coming in ragged puffs, waiting until she saw his dark shape emerge from the gloom before she continued her mission. She led him down a steep, treacherous rocky embankment and into a shallow ravine that offered a sliver of protection from the relentless gale. There, wedged tightly between two massive, moss-covered granite boulders, was her mate. He was a huge male white lynx, his body a canvas of powerful muscle and thick, snowy fur. He was conscious, his head lifted, his eyes tracking their approach with a mixture of pain and weariness. His back leg was trapped deep in a narrow crevice between the rocks. While there was no blood, the entire joint above the trap was swollen to twice its normal size, a dark, ugly bruise spreading across the white fur like a stain. He tried to shift his weight as Liam approached, but a deep, guttural groan of agony stopped him in his tracks. Liam dropped his med kit and knelt in the snow, his gloved hands probing the edges of the boulders. They were solid granite, weighing hundreds of pounds each. He put his shoulder into the smaller of the two and pushed with every ounce of strength he possessed. The rock didn't move a millimeter. He was a strong man, but he wasn't strong enough to fight the earth itself. He looked at the male lynx, trapped and helpless. He looked at the female, shivering, her body strained with pregnancy and exhaustion, her eyes fixed on her mate with a devotion that was heartbreakingly human. A wave of hopelessness washed over him. He couldn't carry a full-grown male lynx, and he couldn't move the boulders alone. But then, a plan began to form, a desperate, exhausting plan. He looked at the female and pointed directly back the way they had come, toward the light of the cabin. Then he pointed at himself, then at her mate, making a wide, pulling gesture with both arms. "The cart!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. "I'm getting the cart. Stay here. Don't move." He turned and scrambled back up the embankment, his lungs burning with the effort. He fought the snow and the freezing wind, his only thought to return as fast as possible. He burst into the cabin, ignored the inviting warmth of the fire, and went straight for the heavy, two-wheeled wooden cart he used for hauling logs. He dragged it outside, its iron-rimmed wheels sinking deep into the fresh drifts. The journey back to the ravine was a special kind of torture. He pulled, heaved, and cursed as the cart snagged on buried roots and bogged down in the snow. When he finally arrived back at the ledge, his body was screaming with effort, and his breath was coming in gasps. He didn't allow himself a second of rest. He found a thick, sturdy fallen log, nearly 6 feet long, and jammed one end deep into the crevice beneath the main boulder. Using a smaller rock as a fulcrum, he put his entire weight and strength onto the end of the log. The wood groaned and bent under the incredible strain. He felt a slight shift, a fraction of an inch. He reset his footing, took a deep, freezing breath, and threw himself onto the lever again. There was a loud, scraping shriek of rock against rock, and the boulder moved just enough. The male lynx instantly yanked his leg free, collapsing onto the snow with a huff of relief. But the work was far from over. The male was pure dead weight, exhausted and injured. Liam grabbed the loose scruff of the lynx's neck and pulled, dragging his front half onto the cart. The cart tipped precariously, and Liam braced it with his own leg. With a final desperate heave that nearly tore his muscles, he lifted the lynx's heavy hindquarters onto the wooden platform. "We're going," Liam grunted. He grabbed the handles, his muscles burning like fire, and began the slow, agonizing haul back to the cabin. The female limped faithfully beside the cart, her nose never leaving her mate's side for even a second. Inside the cabin, the transition was jarring. Liam carefully slid the immense animal off the cart and onto a thick pile of wool blankets he had spread by the hearth. His fingers were numb with cold as he gently unwrapped his emergency kit. He applied a cold compress to the swollen joint and loosely wrapped it with a support bandage. The male white lynx let out a long, shuddering sigh, the heat of the fire finally reaching his bones, and he surrendered to an exhausted sleep. Liam staggered back, his own energy completely spent, and collapsed into his armchair. For the first time, a profound, heavy silence filled the cabin. It was over. Or so he thought. A low, pained whimper cut through the quiet. It was the female. She was pacing the floorboards, a new, frantic energy in her movements. She pawed at the wood, circled 3 times, and then lay down, her body suddenly becoming rigid. A powerful tremor ran through her, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Liam sat bolt upright, his exhaustion forgotten. He knew that sound. The stress, the cold, and the ordeal had sent her into early labor. He slowly and carefully pushed his chair back until it touched the far wall. He slid down to the floor, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. This was no longer his cabin. He was merely a witness to the sacred. In the warm, flickering orange light of the fire, he watched in silent, breathless awe as a new life entered the world. A tiny, wet, squirming white cub was born. The mother, acting on pure, ancient instinct, immediately began to clean her baby, her rough tongue surprisingly gentle against the tiny frame. Minutes later, a second cub followed. She nudged them both toward her belly, curling her powerful body around them to keep them warm. Across the room, the injured male stirred. He lifted his head, his tired eyes fixing on his mate and his new children. A deep, powerful purr began to rumble in his chest, a sound of pure, resonant contentment that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the cabin. The days that followed were a quiet testament to survival and trust. Liam developed a simple, respectful routine. He would leave fresh meat and bowls of water near the hearth, keep the fire roaring around the clock, and check the male's leg from a safe distance. The new family lived by the fireplace, a self-contained world of warmth and nascent life. Gradually, the male's swelling went down, and he began putting weight on his leg. The cub's eyes opened tiny blue diamonds, and they began to take their first clumsy, wobbly steps across the rugs. One morning, nearly 2 weeks later, the blizzard had long since passed, leaving behind a world of pristine, sparkling white. The male white lynx stood up and walked the length of the cabin with only the slightest hint of a limp. Liam knew the moment had come. He walked to the door and pulled it open, letting the clean, cold air fill the room. The male walked to the threshold, looked out at the vast wilderness, and then turned back to his mate. She understood perfectly. She gently picked up the first cub by the scruff of its neck, then the second, and carried them to the doorway. As a complete family, they stood on the edge of the wild. The female paused, set the cub down for a moment, and turned her head one last time. She looked directly at Liam, her gaze steady, clear, and filled with a silent, profound acknowledgement of the debt they owed. Then she picked up her baby, and without a sound, the family melted into the shadows of the pine trees, vanishing as if they had been nothing more than a beautiful, snowy dream.